Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So, of course, this is the game against our chess club member, NiceChessD. So, in this game, I play what is called a bird's defense. So, after f4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, and g3. So, I've probably featured the bird's defense before. Bishop g2, d3, castles, queen e1, and the goal for white is to play e4. So after bishop g4, play bishop g2, knight c6, and NiceChessD is doing the right thing. Trying to remove the defender on f3 so black can play e5. That's the main goal. Queen d7, and now I play the move knight e5. First of all, I believe one of the moves is bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and it really depends whether black wants to play h5 and h4 here, or if black wants to get rowdy with e5. Both moves are fine, it's a matter of choice. Or even e6 is fine, even queen d7, queen h3, h5, they're all fine. But instead, queen d7 happened and I got in knight e5. So already I feel like, getting in knight e5 is an accomplishment. Knight takes e5, f takes e5, and after knight h5, looking at these two pieces, this pawn really put them out of shape, and I'm starting to like my position. So after d4, f6, making a desperate attempt to say, if you take, knight will take back. So obviously I'm not going to take, I'm going to keep my pawn there. So I play knight c3, and I want to take the d5 pawn. So after castles, I then sort of hesitate. I say after knight takes d5, what if black plays c6, right? And after knight e3, queen takes, rook takes, and then after something like c3, I feel like I'm doing good. But I didn't know about this, and I didn't want to avoid the chaos that would happen in the center. So I played queen d3. I said, I might take next move, but I won't take now. So after bishop h3, bishop takes h3, queen takes h3, I decided, this knight looks a bit sad, so I'm going to keep it sad on the corner. So after queen takes f5, rook takes f5, g6, rook f3, and now black has to make the decision, okay, do I take on e5? Do I play f5 and close the position completely? What do I do, right? Or do I, because you have to bring your knight out of there somehow. So my first thought was f5. And it's not a bad thought because it helps solidify your pawn structure. But is it worth closing it down, right? Or is it worth playing takes, and d4 and rerouting your knight back to f5? So there are these kinds of plans you need to consider. So after a6, I play the move g4, and at this point I'm really happy at playing g4 because number one, I get the pawn, right? So if black played f takes e5, d takes e5, and the move knight g7, well now after e6 and knight f5 and bishop c5, I wouldn't be as comfortable as I am now. So instead of choosing that, g6, rook f3, a6 occurs, this feels like, it's a move that goes way off from all the action that's happening over here, right? So all the action that is happening on the king side, but an a6 wild move appears. I get to play g4 and get the pawn. Bishop e7 leads to rook f7, rook e8, and at this point, I can actually even play the move rook takes c7, and after knight takes d5, I have knight takes f6, rook f7, bishop takes d4, king f1, and now rook hf8. At this point, bishop f2, I sort of think, okay, this might be hard, right? And now I just realized I can go king d2. I don't know how I didn't think of that, right? King d2, knight d1, b3, bishop b2. I can easily do that, but somehow I didn't think of that during the game. King d1, bishop e3, and the easy way to do it is repeat and go king d2 or go king f1. Didn't think of that, but instead I told NiceChessD, I said, I want to make it more complicated for myself. I want to try to bring myself out of the dark. So after bishop takes e3, rook f1, I go into this sort of two-piece versus a rook endgame. And I notice that the first move I make is a blunder. Or not a blunder, but more or less an inaccuracy. Why? So my one move is intended to try to trap the rook. Yet, after rook takes a2, b3, I try to limit it to this square. Rook a5, bishop d4, I try to maintain setter control. And after c5, bishop e5, I realize that I can't really trap this rook. It's going to go here, it's going to go here, it's going to come out. So after c4, I have hope again, because after b4, rook b5, I should have played the move knight c3, right? To take the pawn on d5 and play e4 and centralize my pieces. That was the right idea, but I played bishop d6, somehow missed king d7. I don't know why. I thought the king was in the corner or something, so I missed king d7, and after bishop c5, b6, bishop f8, king e8, I play knight c3, and as you can see, this is a completely drawn endgame. So this could have been the very first game in which a Simul member drew me. And I was really proud of somebody who could finally make that happen, right? So after king takes f8, knight takes, a takes, I'm just moving my king up, and I believe this is still drawn. After c3, this, I believe, was the move that gave me the opposition. Now, on first sight, this move doesn't look like it gives the opposition, but black has to be careful here. After h5, g takes h5, g takes h5, and I don't know about e4, because when I played e4, I realized in the game that I believe there's still a draw. D takes, king f6, king f4, and now king g6 with a mistake. So instead, if you play king e6, and I play king g5, well, there is king e5, and here we go, right? So even this is hard, and believe it or not, the only move here was the move h4. Why h4, you ask? Because now you realize that the king has to move to d6 to protect this pawn. And Now, if takes, king e6, black has the opposition. But what if white plays e3? King e6, e4, takes, and now white has what is called the opposition. King f6, king f4, king g6, king e5. Right after king d6, king f5, and the pawn is gone. So that's essentially where the game was decided. But in the game, I allowed my opponent a chance to draw with king e6. But that's so hard to see given that, black needs to see this idea and sort of ignore this pawn. But that's so hard to do at lower rated levels because pawns really do matter at lower rated levels. But when we get to the higher end, we start looking a little bit past the pawns and more to the calculations and the ideas and the variations behind it. So instead what happened was after I got the opposition here, king g6, and I slowly moved in, and you can see that I sacrificed the h-pawn to grab these queenside pawns. And that was a really wild game. I feel like in the opening I played okay, but knight takes d5 was a missed opportunity. After queen d3, well, I was doing okay, but after this queen trade, I underestimated the rerouting of the knight. I sort of in the game, I was just like, okay, now the knight is still out of play, so it's going to look really bad. But indeed, I just realized that black can chop off this pair of pawns, reroute the knight to e6, and become really powerful and more or less making this pawn really weak. So that was something I saw during the game. But after a6, this was the mistake that gave me the advantage. So I got the pawn, and after rook f7, now I got the piece. And at this point, I complicated it for myself. Knight d1 was a mistake on my part. So after rook a5, at this point, it's less about pushing the pawns, but more about king activity. Now you can see that, first of all, this rook, you can make it go here, but is that really necessary, right? Like, does the rook have to do anything if it moves here? Right, so I would suggest, when in the endgame, when in doubt, bring your king out. Although if queens are still on the board, I would not suggest that. If queens are still on the board, don't bring your king out. But if rooks are on the board, knights on the board, bishops on the board, just like a simple-ish endgame, bring your king out. Your king is going to sometimes win you the game, sometimes it's going to blow you the game, but more often than not, the king is a valuable resource. It's a valuable weapon that sometimes you'll need to use. So after c4, b4, you'll notice that this rook is even more closed off than it should be. But after bishop d6, the king was allowed to be brought out, and that was my mistake. And we saw in this game that after g takes h5, the brilliant move here is h4. And after h4, the key move is e3 and e4, gaining the opposition. So in this game, the end game, just one move made the difference, but hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.